Okay, so the main ambition today is to really brainstorm and think about how we're going to maintain the TA program on the longer term. So Nigel's going to give a little bit of a background to some of the aspects, how we are trying to go forward in terms of the space RI and what the implications of that are. We'll then discuss what we are guessing that the European Union are going to impose upon us for future funding of RIs. The main theme certainly seems to be linking infrastructures together and making larger ones. But there's also talk of co-funding, and that's something that we will spend a large part of today discussing. So Nigel, myself, Jonas will try and throw some of the ideas out of what we think is happening first this morning. Then in the subsequent session, we'll have some breakouts where we'll actually try and brainstorm ideas and see what we think is viable. We'll need to think about two aspects. One is, what do we as the society want to do? And what can we potentially do through the European Union? And those would be two different funding options. So it's sustainability of what we've built up and potentially having a larger infrastructure that maybe would be funded periodically through the European Union with co-funding. So there will be two different aspects to the discussion. So we must make sure when we're discussing that we're clear which of those aspects we want to do. So Nigel will just give you a quick context of where we think we are, and then we'll start having more general discussion. So we are not going to give you lots of presentations and lots of slides today. There'll be one or two just to put into context, and then we will discuss. Okay, thanks, Nigel.
Thanks. Okay. So the first thing I think is to kind of think back and just for the younger people in the room, there was a time before Europlanet. I know it's hard to believe. There was a time when as a PhD student, you never left your lab. There was a time when you didn't meet people from other countries. I know it all sounds strange and weird, right? You know, but the core program of Europlanet and many other research infrastructures at the beginning of the century, the philosophy has been to build communities and within the European Union to see Europe as a scientific community which is competitive with basically the USA and now increasingly China. So the philosophy of the European Union and what they call the European Research Area was to capitalize on the intellectual capacity that we have across all of Europe, however you define Europe. And that was kind of a key part of the Europlanet philosophy, because it became increasingly clear that there are particular areas of science where it's almost impossible to think that nation states can go it alone. Even big nation states, and the big ones were normally regarded as the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and sometimes Spain. But in a space program, the idea that the UK or France or something would actually be able to completely go it alone and have its own space exploration program was obviously not possible, and we have ESA to do that. So one of the kind of core things when Europlanet was founded was to say, right, we are better together, working together. And so the very first program, the FP6, was the attempt to start to form this community. And the people who set that up, as I said, it was set around about the time of the Cassini-Huygens mission. Huygens was the first sort of spacecraft, if you like, that was all built in Europe and so on, and was run by European PIs. Okay, it was an American mission, but it was a European probe. And that was the kind of first. And all of you now know the iconic ones that we've had since. We've had Rosetta, we've had Bepi Colombo, we've had numerous ones to Mars, we've had the Venus Express. So the theme about Europe coming of age in space was very much it. FP7 and the 3 subsequent Horizon 2020 for what Europlanet and his research infrastructures were, it was then identified that actually one of the key areas, particularly relating to space, is the fact that we have a lot of facilities across Europe, and if we can pool those facilities and people can use those facilities, they can do better science. It also should be remembered that that a very high proportion of the European population, and that means also a high proportion of European scientists, work in smaller states. Now, Slovakia has some great scientists, but the Slovak government is not able to fund an entire range of space facilities, nor is Hungary, nor is the Czech Republic. So the opportunity for those scientists to be able to use facilities in other countries, as well as opening up their own facilities, was very much the fuss. And this is what Europlanet has done. I don't see Anita in the room. Oh, I do see Anita in the room at the back. But when we were contemplating this meeting and when we were contemplating what we've done, and sometimes you just need to step back and think, wow, what did we actually do? What we have enabled ourselves to do in this long time period is build that research infrastructure. And we have gradually built up the number of facilities and the number of opportunities that we've had. And it is now part of the European scene. If we didn't have this research infrastructure, it would affect many, many people's research. And indeed, I would state that we probably wouldn't be able to do some of the research that we've done. And it trickles down all the way through. The other important thing to remember is that unlike NASA, ESA does not support pre-science programs. And once the mission is over, it doesn't support post-missions. So unlike the States, where you have the NASA labs and so on working hand in glove with the NASA agency, ESA has its labs and so on, but they are purely mission oriented. So a lot of the background work and the stuff which is necessary to develop the instruments before they go onto the missions, and indeed the science is done, cannot be done in the US way with the NASA labs and funding. This is what this Europlanet infrastructure has done. And the reason I'm belaboring that is to make it clear that I think if we don't retain this, we are going to lose something which is giving us a competitive edge. So in the current project, the year 2024, each one has got gradually bigger, and Gareth has been involved in them all, so may want to say a few comments about how it has evolved and how it's been difficult. We looked at basically three areas of transnational access facilities. We have the laboratories, the simulation facilities, for doing simulations of Venus, doing ion irradiation, wind tunnels for simulating Mars. We have analytical facilities, and I think, and Gareth may want to comment on this, but across Europe, we actually have state-of-the-art, world-leading analytical facilities. This is particularly important when we think about sample return. There will certainly be a most wonderful facility in the Netherlands, which would happen to be called Nigel. So, obviously it's bound to be excellent, Gareth. So thank you for choosing that name. Although I do think he probably was thinking more of the dog who's famous in England than me. But anyway, we also know that when we talk to people outside Europe, those facilities are highly respected. On top of that, we started this program, and again, it goes back to about 2005, of having these unique field sites, these planetary analog sites where you can go and do research. You can't go easily. Nobody's going to be landing on Mars for a while, let alone Ceres or the Jovian moons. So you're trying to find areas where you can test your instrumentation, you can test your ideas on extreme life, etc. And these are these field sites. And there have been many expeditions to these field sites, and I see Wolf's in the room, who's well known for organizing field campaigns and field site campaigns in the astrobiology complex and so on, and so on. So we've had various field sites, and they've always been very well subscribed. We do happen to always send up with at least one field site during every one of our projects that goes to war, so I'm not sure. Now, this time it's Ethiopia, last time it was Tunisia, etc. And of course, we had the problem with the pandemic. So the field sites are another important part, and they are, again, kind of unique. And then finally, with Grazina, I don't know if Grazina's in the room, we wanted, it goes back to the original proposal, a person called Steve Miller, who really wanted to do this right at the beginning, this idea of the telescope networks. Because although you've got the big telescopes, you've got the big space telescopes, there is an awful lot of research on the solar system that can be done by ground-based small observatories. And I'm really pleased that in the current project that we finally managed to get that up and running. And I know there was a really good active session on that yesterday. In the current project, we are funding 208 visits. That is a lot of scientific time, which if we didn't have a program, we don't have a way going forward, won't happen. So that's that. If you have got a TA visit outstanding, we'll keep saying it, they have to be completed by May next year in this program. So otherwise Gareth will be very concerned. So where do we go in the future to retain this? As I've said throughout this meeting, there will not be, as far as we know, you can never quite know, the Commission may have a completely change of mind and road to Damascus moment, but I doubt it. We will probably never have another Europlanet RI. We've done incredibly well. We've had 3 of these. There's only one program that's had more, and that's the Optical and Radio Telescope Network, who are about a bit ahead of us. But as Gareth said, the Commission now is saying, right, we're not going to invent loads of more research infrastructures. There are several hundred research infrastructures that have been created over a period of history. About 30% of those research infrastructures have had one call. They've come and they've gone. And there's no legacy. Okay? So the Commission didn't like that. Then there's about 50% who have had perhaps 2 goes, 2 bites of the cherry. They've had a starting community and they've had an advanced community. Many of those are in the same position as we are. They don't know how they're going to exist in the future. And then there are a few who have had this longer term support, like us and like ARP. The community, the EC, wants now to work in big clusters. This came about in the last call on space data. They decided that in what they call an E-infrastructure, that's all your virtual tools and your e-learning tools. They've decided that everything should be focused around EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud. If you haven't looked into the European Open Science Cloud and you're going to be a professional scientist in Europe, you should. And they created an entity where they've got all the areas together and they just lumped them into one area and they called it astronomy. Okay. Now, we have had debates about what astronomy means. Okay. I know it may sound strange, but there are different people who don't think that planetary science and astrobiology is astronomy. I will use the traditional English dictionary definition of astronomy, which is anything out there. Okay, that's astronomy, right? So they were given money to organize things virtually. What they've now decided is to do that we should do something similar in the more TA type program. And they've called this Frontiers of Knowledge. So many of the research infrastructures that they're looking at are focused on applied science and industry. So for example, things like the semiconductor, big one on that, nanotechnology or nanofabrication, drug design. We are a community that's known as Frontiers Knowledge. So we are about one of the few that were chosen to do Frontiers Knowledge. So they said, they gave us a title. It wasn't the title we wanted. It was called Astroparticle Physics and Astrophysics or something. But we agreed that we would put a proposal together. So this is one way that we will move ahead. But this is one project that we might get funded, we may not get funded. If we get funded, great. But we can't rely on the fact that we are going to exist by winning the lottery. You know, you buy your ticket, you don't always win. Nonetheless, I think this gives you an idea of what the Commission thought is, and Gareth will say a bit about that a bit later about it. But this is the kind of landscape that we'll be working in the future, that Europlanet will be joining other projects. other astronomy programs, other projects. So we'll have a suite of these projects. We won't have a single one for us. We will be working with partners to do this sort of stuff. But if we had a roadmap and if we had a dream, this is probably what we would quite like, if we're lucky to get it. It's called the Space Eye. We should know in July. It would operate in the same way. But we will never have a TA that is purely planetary science anymore. So you'll see here the nuclear accelerator facilities. Okay, there is some overlap. We do use nuclear accelerator facilities, particularly in Hungary. In the current project, we brought in a Tomkey to do that, to look at some planetary science, to look at radiation on planetary surfaces. But this is much more about star formation in the early Earth and formation of the elements. You've got the radio telescopes down here, very much more focused on star formation, galaxies, and so on. That's not to say that we don't do that, that we'll have some overlap with our optical facilities. But note these laboratory analysis facilities, really important. There are other research infrastructures that look at analytical stuff. And we've included 5 field sites in there. And then we have our virtual access. If this project is funded, great, right? But because the amount of numbers here are really important. It's 10 years of access. Now, it's a very big community, the space community, but 10 years of access is a really significant part. If that's what the community wants, that's what the EC wants, I think this project would deliver it, okay? 10 years of access is an awful lot of access and makes a really big significant. We should be looking not at a few hundred publications, we should be looking at 1,000+ publications if we get this project. We will provide 1,000 months of user support. That is community support to enable you to do things. Some of that's managerial support, some of that's for outreach, some of that's for industry, etc. And these are all the projects, the legacy projects that have been brought into this. So there are about, I think there are 21. You'll see all the different ones down there. This is all that the Commission has funded over this period of time. And now it's also got to be brought together. So that's what the Commission wants. It wants this continuity, it wants this legacy, and everything else. I hope we get it, but we will know. And this just breaks it down again a little bit more. These are some of the other research infrastructures which you'll hear about. And tomorrow, all of them are here. At the session tomorrow morning in this room, you'll be hearing about these other ones that we overlap with. Okay. And we broke it up into science. And this is, again, something we've been talking about this week. We haven't got much in Europlanet. It's very much organizational. Now we maybe need to start to talk about the science that we do and use Europlanet a bit more for the science. So we had this discussion yesterday with the example, again, of EII, where there are scientific working groups as well as managerial groups. And maybe that's a way of getting academics to be more directly involved. We'll see what people think. But we have the physical, the chemical universe. This just gives you the stretch. So we're all going to be part of this. And Europlanet probably sits somewhere between the search for life and the chemical universe, because we do cover both those areas. And I think some of you would say that we also do some of the physical universe, but planet formation and star formation is of interest. But that's the community that we work in. So that's the landscape that Europlanet will work in the future. And these are the science themes. So these are the science themes around which we will build and around which our research infrastructures have to build. So these topics here are all ones that have basically emerged from all these different strategic reviews that you'll hear about tomorrow. There's the Astronet review, there's the ESRI review, there's some national reviews, then there's the ESA reviews. But I think you basically will see your topics there. So if you've got early career people, look down here, because these are the areas that's kind of been identified as the research topics for the next 10 years. And our infrastructure builds into those to support people to do this science. And whatever research infrastructure we build in planetary science, it should enable people to deliver on these topics. So, where do we go? And what do we talk about today? As I say, and maybe Anita has gone again, we have to recognize, we must recognize that we have actually built this research infrastructure. It exists. These labs have been involved. Some of these labs have been involved in the projects for now nearly 15 years. So those laboratories and those institutes have done very well out of being part of the Europlanet structure. We need to maybe remind them of that. we have created something which the community can use. And the community probably doesn't always know, but it's got it, but will only recognize the value of it sometimes when it's not there. And we don't want to get to that stage. So we have to ask, does the community recognize this, and will it support the Europlanet moving forward? Because if it doesn't, we're in trouble. But again, sometimes I think that consciousness needs to remind people. So if you're academic, you need to remind your institution that actually you've done pretty well out of this. And think of all the other things that have come from it. It may be that there are many spin-offs. So you may have got other national grants because you're part of Europlanet. You may have attracted people who came to you on a TA visit and then said, oh, I really like it here. I think Gareth's lab's absolutely great. I think I'll apply for a Marie Curie, or I'll apply for an ERC. If we didn't have that mechanism, those things will be harder to do. Okay, so I think we need to think about how we do it. But we can't rely on winning the lottery every time. I hope that we will get the space side proposal. Unfortunately, we do have a competing bid. The gravity waves and the cosmologists were going to put in their own bid. I would have liked them to come in with us and work with us, but that was their choice, and that's perfectly acceptable. You're allowed to, of course you can. So we do have a self-competing bid. I try to avoid bids that self-compete because that's never good, but we will see. Yep. Right. In this particular call, of Frontiers call, we have two other things. We have one on kind of more climate related, and the other one is arts and humanities.
Just a short question:
yeah.
How many grants will there be accepted? How much is
well,
the budget?
originally we were told that this Frontiers call they would fund two. Well, it's a bit funny because the money's a bit budget. It'd be two out of the three. However, I was told last week by people who seem to know that the Commission is now realising that it may now have to fund one of each topic. Yeah. So in our case, we have a competing bid, and it will be one or the other. It will be one or the other, or none. But I think it will be one or the other. So. But apparently, I don't know. Well, I knew that the guys at the head and other people had been in meetings, and there was a discussion. And it does seem that the Commission is now thinking, okay, we've got ourselves into a bit of a bind here because we're going to really upset one community, which we've tried to encourage, and now we're kind of stuffed. So they look at the budget profile overall, and the possibility is that they will, assuming that all the bids reach the criteria. The problem is the arts and humanities. We don't know how many arts and humanities bids will go in because it can be anything. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they will fund three. Yeah. So we are assuming
there's 7 bids that were submitted, and they will fund. I mean, the plan was 2, and you're saying maybe 3.
Yeah, so the chance that we know that there are 2 space ones. There is only, I believe, one on the biodiversity one, and that means that would leave 4 arts and humanities ones, which would be reasonable because arts and humanities is a huge range. Although the amount of money for arts and humanities is less than the others, so we will see. If we do not get that bid, of course, there are future calls and there are future opportunities. But the TA program, it's very hard to think how the EU is going to fund it in any other way. This is the only way at the moment they have for funding a TA program. We have stressed, as has all other research infrastructures, that the TA program is a unique European thing and that it's something that they should be proud of, and it has been a great success. There is no other mechanism for the European Union to fund TA access other than through these calls. So if we don't get this one, maybe there will be another call in 2 or 3 years' time. But we can't guarantee that because they've selected us as frontiers, and who knows? There are other frontier areas that haven't been selected yet. So we can't rely on it. It's what we want to do, it's what we like. So we have to think today about how we would continue to do this in alternative ways. And that's what we want to discuss. If the Commission moves forward in TA programs, and I am sure there will be some degree of TA program in the future, They do get that message, and they are arguing with the rest of the Horizon Europe program. It is very likely that they will ask for co-funding. There was a call out in this round for anybody who wanted to go forward and try the co-funding route. We don't have a mechanism yet for doing co-funding, and indeed there are very, very few other people who did. So it'll be interesting to see in that call who did it. I suspect it could only be really large organizations like CERN that might put in a co-funding bid. But for our type of research infrastructure, we're not yet at that program of how we do co-funding. What amount of money would we have to put into co-funding? Again, well, it's going to be up to 50%. I have heard that the Commission was originally looking at 30–40%, but is being pressed that 25% is a more reasonable number. It doesn't really matter at the moment because we haven't got 25% or 40% or 50%, but it's a number to bear in mind. And it isn't also, they also insisted in this first call that it was real cash. So you had to put money on the table. You couldn't say, I'm going to donate some staff or some stuff. They wanted it as real cash. They wanted it as measurable cash. And that's for another reason why many people said we can't do that. And in particular, at a time of pandemic, this was not a good time to ask institutions to put real cash on the table. So for most research infrastructures, and we'll be discussing this on Thursday, it's not really an option yet. But it will be the way. So we have to, as Dale says, we have to think about that. So we are going to be discussing some ideas, okay? And I'll throw out a few ideas. So one way is that we've got all these research infrastructures, we've got all these institutions that have benefited from Europlanet and for this funding for up to 15 years. Will they put their hands in their pocket and put some money on the table to support a smaller research infrastructure program independent of funding, or also to plan for the fact that we will need some co-funding? And that would mean that each institution, however you define that institution, would have to put in money between 2,000 and 10,000 euros, depending on the size we think about it. Can we get that support? Because it is not a good time for universities at the moment, post-pandemic and everything else, and crises with budgets and everything else, we're all suffering. Would these institutes or would these groups be able to, what would they have to commit to? Basically, what they would be committing to probably is, again, what we sort of said in the Space Side proposal. We have a minimum amount in the current one. Anybody who joins one of these research infrastructures has to pledge a minimum amount of access that they will provide. That's the kind of the agreement. We're probably looking at only 1 or 2 weeks per year, okay? I think of the Space Side, what was the number of days we committed to people to? It was only about 50, 60 days, wasn't it, or even less. So it can be more, but the institution commits. So would each group be able to say, oh, yeah, I can take external visitors for 1 or 2 weeks a year. I can bring them, I will commit myself to finding time in my lab to fund, 2 weeks worth of visits. It's not a lot, but it would be the sort of minimum level that would make it sensible. And then we can talk about the mechanisms. I'm sure Gareth will talk about that. What are the other mechanisms? Well, we are now a legal entity. And this is one of the really important things about AISBL. We can now have contracts. And there are some people that we may like to talk to. We may want to talk to ESA, for example, and say, you want all these facilities, but you're having to run it all from ESTEC. This is an organization that can do it for you. You want field sites, we can give you the field sites. Give us a contract to do it. And there may be others. And we have to think right the way across the board, including some out-of-the-box thinking, for example, on crowdfunding. And I think Anita might want to say a comment on that, because there are examples, and maybe Wolf knows them as well, where people have crowdfunded expeditions to field sites and so on. And we could look into that. If we set up a platform as part of the AISBL, where we could ask for crowdfunding sources, people could get involved in the space program. We have had some discussions in a very small way at Kent. I have one of my students who's just put up on one of the crowdfunding sites a project for looking at lava tubes on Mars. And we're looking at some origins of life work. we were told by the people who do this that the three most topical areas, the areas that attract the most scientific crowdfunding, health is the first one, obviously, then environmental, the third is space. People like space, right? They like giving money to space. They like space. And so it's a way, it's an alternative way. So we have to think about all these activities that we can do. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about the ways and means of doing that. So we need to discuss the ideas and think out of the box, because we have to have a plan B. Let's hope that the space side gets funded. It would be brilliant if it does, because I think, and we'll see on Thursday, I think bringing all these people together has provided an enormous amount of cross-fertilization of ideas across all the different areas of space. I'll use the word space rather than astronomy, so we don't get into a debate about what's astronomy. We're looking out, okay? But as a society, this week is about thinking about other ways we can do it and retaining this infrastructure. And it's the same for the VAs. We're not going to talk about the VAs here. This is a TA session, but we have to remember the enormous amount of stuff that's been done in the VAs, which is, again, a unique legacy. All right, so that's my discussion. And Gareth, you want to now take over and then maybe pass some comments, or any comments on questions for me, or then
Okay, yes, okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I think one of the most important thing when you do field work or when you want to organize field work is probably not really the money, because I mean, you will not really be able to fund everything. I mean, the really good thing is to have local knowledge, help with the red tape, and also one very important thing is the access to field lab. We had actually a partnership with the Feldspar field project with the University of Akureyri, and they have had a completely equipped field, microbiological lab. And that was a huge advantage, because we were working at the Holoron lava field from the 2014 eruption, and we were shuttling the samples back and forward over the Icelandic roads, which can be a little bit difficult, but we actually could develop our field work along the way we worked. So I mean, we could modify our program according to the results, and that was a big asset, because that brings you so that you're actually working like a mass sample robot, that you actually get your sample, analyze it, and then based on this sample, you make the next plans. So I think this is an important thing, maybe, and this maybe can actually be sustained, because we made we know this is important, because the first field excursion we had just the room at the hotel, where we had to get the water even from the adjacent toilet, much to the gaudium of the tourists. And then we had a school lab as a lab, which was already an advantage, where we used the Kelomat of the school kitchen as an autoclave. And then we had luckily got the cooperation, and we had a fully equipped microbiological lab. And it was really palpable how you could improve on the results.
And having that infrastructure, but if people wanted to develop something where they do a field, so having that kind of infrastructure where we've got these things within a Europlanet, they declared as part of a Europlanet laboratories or whatever we call them, that would be good. So I think that's it. Anne.
Yeah, I have a question about the annual fee you are talking about. So do I understand correctly that it's the institution hosting the lab who will have to pay to be? So I can agree to that, but then I place myself in this institution. I don't want to pay to be in a network for people outside coming, using the facility. And so that's a double pay.
But your people are going to the other facility.
That's probably not working, because we are probably not in the same field as the other. So can you then make no profit? That's not a question of profit, but at least the people who are coming into your facility, they should pay at least for the the material. You will be using gas. You can't pay twice. For
I'm going to let Gareth. I mean, this is going into the details of a discussion that we're going to have throughout of how this might work and so on. And indeed, institution, it may not be that you would just be selling this bit. It would have to be a package of other things that Europlanet would provide. Well, this would just be one part of it. But this is what we're going to discuss. Except but it's a way of saying, okay, institutions that join Europlanet commit. And there are many other things that they could benefit from. But that's what we need to do in the same way as we need to define why do you join the society.
Nigel, sorry. This is Susan, for people online. So I didn't see it in that way when you put that slide up, because that reminded me of a discussion I had with one of our CNRS institutes, where they asked me what would be the benefits of being an institutional member of the Europlanet Society. Would it be access to the transnational facilities? And so when I saw that, I thought you were talking more like the institutes who would like to use the facilities would pay, not the institutes necessarily providing. Yeah. So it not hey, you're providing a facility, hey, now pay. No, I mean, but more, hey, we have these facilities. Yeah. Please pay, and if you happen to also be providing them, well. Yeah.
I see it that way. I mean, I think it's two ways. So I kind of assume that if you have a facility, you cover like you're more likely to also attract people as well as send people. But you could take the point that there are some institutions don't have access to these facilities in smaller countries. They don't have a facility themselves. They're buying into access to something which they can't access otherwise.
Yeah, and so I mean, this question, like I said, was asked by the INSU, which is actually in the CNRS, which actually englobes like lots of different laboratories. So you could imagine maybe them paying sort of a fee overall that benefits all the labs that are part of that institute, essentially. Yeah. But maybe that's pretty unique to France, that kind of organization, because obviously there's a sort of top level thing that can negotiate on behalf of them. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the general things. I'm sure Jonas is going to say something about that in a minute. This is opening up the discussion, which is absolutely great. But I'm going to hand over to Gareth now, because I know Gareth wants to say something, and then I think he was going to ask Jonas to say something or whatever, and then maybe Anita too, and Vim and whatever. You just go.
I don't really have a comment. Maybe just the following questions to what Susan is saying in trying to figure out if it would work. And do we have? So I can start to look it up, but we may need to find some statistics on how many people. So sorry. From which institutes were the people that accessed the TA fieldworks and field sites? Were they from the TA and field sites institutes that we had from Europlanet, or were they from other institutes? It's a mixture, but how much were there people that were not from these institutes? So if it's a majority, it could.
My guess, without checking, was it was about 50-50. So it's over the last 15, 20 years or so, Party has been educating the community and making sure everybody's aware. So all the people in the system tended to use the system at the beginning, and we're getting better and better at getting people from outside the system. But still, those of us within do tend to use and abuse the system because we know how it works. So I think it's probably close to 50-50. In terms of the field sites. I think in terms of the lab sites, it's probably slightly lower. I think there's probably more people outside the 20 or so labs that apply from all sorts of different areas. Coming back.
I mean, just on that, this has been a criticism of the research infrastructure program as a whole, that particularly in the beginning, it was very hard to try and persuade people that we really are offering something for free. It's remarkable how difficult it was to get people outside saying, "Oh, but we've got to be a member of the project." No, it's still there, and I noticed that even in the KETEC, which is the most recent one, they're still having that problem. They're still finding it difficult to get people outside those accelerator facilities to apply. So as Gareth says, it was a lot of people in the society, in the infrastructure, using the infrastructure. But that's not the philosophy. The philosophy of research infrastructures is that you are opening them up to Europe, and people around Europe should be using them. And we've got better at that.
I'd like to make a comment coming back to sort of Anne-Carine's question, which I think was very pertinent. And it's something that, okay, I run one of the labs. Wim runs one of also the labs in our institution. And we've talked about the fact that, okay, we're committing time and effort and resources. Okay, at the current funding model, we say, okay, access to the lab, I'll make up a number, is €1,000 a day. And somebody comes from 5 days and we get paid 5,000, and we cover virtually all our costs. Maybe the senior scientists don't get covered in that, but all the technical costs and the analytical costs and the consumables are covered. I think, you know, we put time and effort in, but then we think, well, what is the benefit for us? Well, we end up working with talented people from around the world, and it is around the world because people now come from America, Japan, all over the place. And sometimes we get a really good piece of science, and sometimes we ending up with long-term collaborations. So 5, 6 years ago, somebody from Israel contacted us. They came to our lab. We brainstormed. We came up with some other ideas, and they actually came back recently. That's leading to high-ranking papers. We're going to write proposals together. We'll probably have a joint postdoc, and these things happen naturally. And that's why I commit our lab to do this, because sometimes things take off that you don't necessarily know about. The question we're now faced with is, if we have to put and invest money ourselves into the system, which is what the co-funding is going to mean, exactly how we do that we'll discuss more. The thing I'm considering is it still good for my lab to be involved? Do we still get enough benefits that it's worth? In my case, let's say I'm going to have a visitor, and therefore I have to fund for my institution 5,000–6,000 euros for that person to come and visit, and I have to pay that. So I have to work and do commercial work somewhere else and get the money invested. Am I still prepared to do that? That's something we all have to consider. Is it still worth doing that? Do you still think that the scientific benefits and spin-offs over the next 10 years are going to be worth that investment? So I think that's how the TA facilities have to think about it to some extent. If we end up coming up with a model where the labs themselves have to commit some of the funding. Let's say if we do in the big space RI, if that continues, and we then have to find 25–30% of the funding, can the labs do that themselves? Will their institutions let them do that? That's a big question. I mean, it is unclear yet whether this co-funding will be taken on and the universities will accept it and they'll allow you to earn the money on the side so that you can fund visitors. Clearly, the National Funding Agency won't say, yeah, we're funding your lab some of the time, and of course you can invite people from Japan and Germany and France, and we'll pay for that. That's not going to happen. So we have to see what sort of models we can come up with. But for the facilities themselves have to consider, do they want to be involved? Do they think there's enough scientific benefit? It may not be tomorrow, it may be in 5 years' time, but you have to think, is this investment worthwhile? So several hands went up there. So Susan is ladies first, and she's next to the microphone, and then Wolf.
Yeah, I was thinking about you saying, so you know, the visit costs 5,000, and so and just we're using numbers here. But what if, for example, your lab was way more successful than others at attracting visitors? Maybe that would then come back as you have a figure where you break even or don't pay at all. You know, would I know that kind of puts in the competition, but then that, you know, that kind of maybe sets up a healthy competition where labs actually are really actively seeking people to come and use their facilities and encouraging people to put applications in.
Okay, so the implication there was the more successful you are, the less you have to pay.
In terms of somebody providing a service.
That's something we certainly have to consider through. And And for those of you who aren't totally familiar with the facilities, the way they're run at the moment, we make up a fictitious budget at the beginning, and we give money. We say we will allocate money to all the all 30, 40 facilities, and we know that doesn't work. It won't work like that because more will come to one lab than the other. So Fulvio's got the microphone. He's going to say something in a minute. Going to do fieldwork in Botswana was popular, so more people went to Botswana than we budgeted, but we knew that was going to happen. So retrospectively, we always redistribute the money afterwards. I really don't know how we could have some sort of encouragement because ultimately we mustn't forget everything we are talking about is peer reviewed and not by us. So when people apply, the facilities say, yes, technically we can host this field work, or we can do these analyses, or we can do these simulations. And therefore, if the person comes, we can host them. And then it's out of our hands, and then it's peer reviewed, and it's totally at arm's length, and we have no input to that at all. So in that respect, we can't control, which is why Botswana has been highly successful. And we couldn't say, oh, you can't go to Botswana. But basically, Fulvio would say, I can only host 2 or 3 visits per year. That's the maximum. I can't take any more, and that's the bottom line. And the same in Iceland. They've had even more visits than Botswana. So we set up a few parameters, which would be, what's the capacity? What are you prepared to take? And that's all we will ask people if they're joining the TAs and are involved, to say, what is your minimum commitment and what is your maximum commitment? And anything in between is possible, and we can't promise it. So more or less popular, I'm not sure how to do that, but I honestly don't think we'll be able to do that because the problem there I foresee is that the bigger labs like CNRS, DLR, that have more facilities and more infrastructure, they're probably going to be favored over some of the smaller labs in the underrepresented states. And if anything, we want to favor the smaller independent labs and encourage more collaboration with those areas than the bigger ones. I can see the concept of the fees to join, as Nigel laid out. I can see that's much easier to accommodate with big institutions like CNRS and DLR. They will see, because they're so big and they have so many labs involved, okay, it's highly sensible for French researchers to go to labs around the world, and that they will their compensation for that is that some will come to them, and they're paying some. So whereas a small university with one lab within the whole department asking for money, which is then taking money from other labs in the same department, that is going to be much, much more difficult to handle. Just the practicalities. I mean, Wim and I have been nicely told our university just announced 25 million short this year, cut everything. So there's no point of us in the next year or two going and ask the university even for 2,000 a year, because the answer is no. So we know we would have to generate their money somewhere else. And that's why we're going to have to be flexible. Some of the bigger institutions may be happy to put in 10,000 a year from CNRS or DLR, which is to them is peanuts. But other places might have to say, well, if you're going to sign up, you're committing to generate somewhere commercially 5,000 euros or whatever to contribute. These are things we're obviously going to discuss and think through. Yeah, there were some more. Fulvio, please.
Yes, thank you, Garrett. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah. So clearly for field sites like Botswana and Ethiopia, this model is going to be very hard to sustain, because I can't ask even €1 to my university. Honestly speaking, because we are a family now, they think that projects like these are a burden for the university, not a benefit, because they want money to come in. They don't care about visiting people. So the the way I can see the field sites to be sustained, if we turn them into a profitable business. So for instance, we know that I need 5,000 euro to take 2 people in the field. So there are plenty of groups out there that are paying to come to Botswana. I have a group for Korea that is coming in 2 months, not through Europlanet, that is paying a lot of money for our organization. There are at least 3 groups from Europlanet TA that instead of the 2 people that we sponsor, they are coming in 5, 6, 7, or 8 because they do have budget. So the question is that most of these people, especially to Ethiopia and Botswana, they don't come because they don't have money. They come because they don't have organization. So they use Europlanet as a logistical support. So for the field site, I think it's better if we sit down and we see how, instead of tying them to institutions, to make sure that we keep the organization alive, we adjust the numbers. Like right now we are using cars from my university, which is sort of free. Maybe we increase a little bit the price and we say, okay, now we rent cars, like I'm doing with the Korean that are coming with big bucks. You know, so I think that would be, at least for Botswana, I don't know Ethiopia because I don't know the situation there, but for Botswana, the only way to, and even for the rest of Africa, the other sites that we talked about, I think the best way for sustainability, the way forward would be to sell them as packages for scientific tours. And you want to come in 2, you pay 5,000. You want to come in 20, you pay 100,000. And that's something to think about. Otherwise, if you ask the institutions to buy into the project, they will not see that. Just briefly, sorry, then I'll give it back to you. The other alternative would be to help the single institutes to source funds through international donors. But as far as I know, there's no funding agency that would give money for field analogs like per se, and as not part of the
very pertinent observations, and there are several more things I want to follow up along some of those lines as well. One thing I want to say now before I pass over to Anita is that we're going to brainstorm later this morning on these things and talk for more this afternoon. There are lots of other aspects here about what other sources of funding can we get, and how would we then distribute that between different areas. Clearly big central labs are much easier to deal with than the individual ones and the field sources. So do you want to come up here? If there's anything online, can you please tell me? Okay, and those of you online, please feel free to join in.
Okay, so we are clearly at the very start of this, and ideas are by necessity very fuzzy at this point. But I think there are other organisations that we can look at to at least give us ideas about how we might go about things, and can probably approach and have some discussions with to see what we can learn from them, whether there are any potential partnerships or ways of collaboration. Not necessarily saying that we would collaborate with them, and maybe we want to do our own thing, but there are things that we can learn from. One is the Austrian Space Forum that managed to organise these massive campaigns, massive field campaigns, where they essentially, you know, take everything. They don't have the logistical support that Fulvio and the team in Botswana, for example, or in Ethiopia have on site. They take everything with them and create that. They do that through sponsorship. They do that through national agencies. Some funding through ESA and so on. We can certainly have a look and see what they do, find out how they do it, see whether we could do something. We have the infrastructure built up. We know how we're doing things. We have the practical experience. We don't necessarily need to, you know, if they're able to raise 10 million to do something like that, we don't necessarily need to raise anything like that much to be able to support some people that don't have the money already sitting in their pocket to be able to go and do these things and to continue to support our community. ones that we've been thinking about in a very preliminary way. As Nigel says, there's crowdfunding platforms to support research, but there's also things like the Planetary Society in the States, as Joan's been looking at. We may try and organise a meeting with them when we go, if we go to DPS in October. If we're going to be out in the States anyway, see whether we can go and at least kind of learn from their experiences. But they have, through public support, through public funding, they bring in subscriptions that enable them to fund projects. Now, in their case, they're really ambitious things like launching satellites. We don't necessarily want to do that, but to fund something like a TA program, we have all kinds of amazing stories within the TAs that at the moment we don't do anything like as much as we could do with. Now, that's partly because that's partly for time, because we've, especially this project where we had almost nothing happening, and then we had a tidal wave of reports that all came in at the same time, and we haven't really had time to go through them and kind of see what's there, particularly because we've had proposals to write and this meeting to organise and everything else going on within the comms team, but also because, as you all know, working in research, much of the time people don't want to talk about what they're doing because they are looking at publication. Now, if you are essentially doing crowdfunding where people cannot go to a facility or a field site without, you know, one of the prerequisites is to get that money, then they have to do that as a publicly facing activity. They have to report on what they're doing. You know, the contract has changed, the opportunity has changed, but you know, we have amazing things going on within the TA program, from weird fungal studies, dark fungal matter in the Arctic. We've got Roman dating of cultural heritage things. We've got all kinds of exciting astrobiology experiments. We've got people from all ages, from all countries, doing all kinds of exciting things. If we could package that up to a much more public friendly kind of way, I'm not necessarily talking about where people pitch their projects and those ones that sound funky but aren't necessarily scientifically interesting get funded. I think we would want to carry on with a peer-reviewed thing so that we carry on doing our objective of supporting the most exciting science. So we would still basically have a subscription where you can join to support these kind of things, and we can highlight projects that are within it that you have supported through doing it. So it's a bit more like altruistic support, perhaps charity support, in the kind of things that you can kind of tell the stories afterwards of, these are the things that you've done. But I don't know. I mean, I think there are things that we can do. There are people that do this, and we need to look at the creatives. All of these things, I think, nothing is going to work on its own. You know, we're never going to raise enough money through institutions, through crowdfunding or whatever, through people doing it as a commercial activity. We're not going to be able to do any of that on its own. But looking at all of these things in collaboration, and not being overly ambitious to start with. We are not going to be funding 200 visits off our own bat. You know, we're looking much more in the case of organising, 10, if we're lucky, 20 visits a year. But if we have that objective, that we want to work out how we can do this on our own, sustainably, a small programme to support research through transnational access, through visits to facilities, field sites. That is our objective within Europlanet. We need to do that we need to be able to do that if we're going to be able to attract the co-funding. You know, we can't just say that we're going to do it. We have to show that we can do it if in the longer term we're going to be able to supplement that by EU funding. So we have a lot of work to do over the next 14 months. This is why we've kind of given ourselves this time scale of between now and September 2024 to scope out some of these ideas, to go and talk to people, to see really what we think will work and what won't work. But we really welcome all ideas and all feedback, all, do you know what, that's really not going to work because all experiences. But, you know, if we do not have the ambition to do it, if we do not believe that there are ways that we can do it, we're never going to get anywhere. So, Gareth.
There's one more thing that I've written down that I wanted to stress is that one of the questions we're going to have from all the labs really is what's in it for us, because that's the first reaction of all the people. And one of the things we've been thinking about is that we do now have this legacy, and we have made this impact. And I think that's something that we probably need to make more of, and almost have some sort of kite mark to say, okay, we're labs that are part of Europlanet. We have this credibility. We will hopefully then try and sell this to ESA and other places to say, look, you know, these are labs that we know that ESA to some extent know what labs they want. And I mean, John Merrison's lab, for example, they're quite often sending people there to do dust studies, and they have to do that before that instrument can be considered to be valid for incorporation in a mission. So we need to be making sure that we're telling the agencies, look, you should be working with us. We can deliver this, and therefore we need to be scoping out and making sure we know what is required. We've made the big investment to look more in terms of ice. This current TA area, we recognize that the Jovian moons is a big research aspect, so that's why so many ice-based facilities came on that. So we always need to be thinking ahead and planning, and we can't just sit still. So we will be encouraging new people to join, but we then have to think about what is actually achievable and manageable, because if we're going to have two visions in some ways. One, we do get funded through Space RI and we keep that going, in which case we can fund a management structure that can oversee this like we have at the moment. That's a huge amount of time and effort. What we're going to do on our own has to be at a much smaller scale, but we have to prove that we can do that, because there will be periods when we won't be funded in the next 10, 15 years. Okay, I won't be standing here talking about it then, but we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. But there we also have to think about how we're going to manage that. What managerial structure are we going to deal with? I was naively saying, okay, the labs could maybe contribute some of the funding. Now, if the Space RI system works and we have to find 25, 30%, then we're basically saying to all the labs, you're funded for 5 days a week for a visit. Well, you're only going to get 3, because the 2 days are going to be for the management costs and your contribution in kind. Can you fund that circa 40% of the visit? These are things we're going to have to talk about and think about. What sort of models can we cut that 40% down by crowdsource funding and funding from elsewhere? How do we do that? On the Space RI scale, where we're talking about, was it 10 years? That is a huge amount of external funding, and we're talking probably 2 or 3 million is what we're talking about. We'd have to find from elsewhere. That's massive. You don't need to find that funding. No, but I mean, if that model continues here in say 5, 6, 7 years time, if we want to try again, and they say co-funding, we're talking in the order of 25% of 15 million is okay. It's that's serious amounts of money, and that's why the next 5, 6, 7 years we have got to work out what can we do, what can we build, and what can we support. In terms of the Europlanet, let's just focus on us as opposed to the whole thing. We're probably only talking about only 1 million we would have to find. But that is still a huge amount of money. Now, if every partner from the Europlanet side of things, so let's say 40 TAs, then that's still 25,000 each that you have to find to be involved in the projects, but that's putting things into context. What sort of amounts of money we're talking about. What we plan for the next, say, 5 or 6 years is to, if we try and set things up and set a sustainable Europlanet TA facility, there we will be much smaller in scope. We'll see how we can set things up, and as Anita said, maybe try and support 10, 20 visits per year. How do we get people involved? How do we encourage labs to see the benefit? Can we get the space agencies to sign us up and say, okay, we recognize if your field sites are so good, it's silly us as a space agency taking our own people off to the Canaries or whatever and sending things up and setting it up ourselves when we can just jump on the Iceland field site, for example, where they have exactly the same rocks and probably more variety, and we have the infrastructure there. So that's the way we're going to have to work and communicate and discuss and see how we can sign people up. But at the back of it all, we must always recognize we have to offer something that makes the laboratories want and the field sites want to be involved. They must see some benefit. I mentioned the scientific benefits I see because we work with good people, but there must be more. Maybe you get this some sort of, we're part of Europlanet and ESA and other people are coming to us and we raise the profile, and like Fulvio said, and then the Koreans are coming to Botswana because they've heard about the field site through Europlanet, and there are these sort of spin-offs that all help. But there won't be one single thing that we're going to do that's going to solve the problems. Jonas has a question or comment?
It's just a comment. So you're saying like 1 million, but it's over 4 years, right?
Pardon?
You said 1 million.
It's over 4 years.
For over 4 years.
Yeah,
so it would
okay.
be
So
25 per lab. So it would be like 5,000 to 8,000 per lab. So is it worth what you're getting out of it?
That's the big question.
And how much money would you be able to?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to put every year to get this sort of?
So this is the key thing that we have to bear in mind all the time. I've seen Wolf. We'll come back to you in a minute. In terms of the scientific spin-offs, I think several thousand a year, even 5,000 a year, as far as my lab's concerned, and we can generate the money. That's the important thing. We're a relatively big national lab, and so we have lots of visitors and do the odd commercial work. So generating that sort of money is viable for my group. My colleague Wim, I'm not sure. I don't think he does the commercial work. It's not so easy for him to bring that money in. So when we're looking at these funding, whatever ways we find of earning the money, we're going to have to recognize some labs can do this relatively easily and others can't. Are we going to then sort of sponsor each other? I don't know. These are things we're going to have to discuss and think through, because certainly some labs might just be doing if they're doing pure material science, they might be able to get industry to come in and do things commercially. I know some of the DLR labs, they work with the car companies, or how do materials behave under extreme temperatures and pressures and things. That sort of thing happens occasionally. Other labs don't have that possibility. So we have to recognize that certain labs have the capability to fund themselves, others don't. So what are we going to do about that? Are we going to say, we think that is an important facility, we want it in, but we recognize they can't earn the money, and they're a small university, therefore their department isn't going to pay 2,000 or 3,000 a year. What do we do about that? These are things we have to discuss over the next day or so. Wolf's got the microphone, so he's going next.
I think one has to also bear into mind that when you provide a field site as a lab and they provide access, you're also providing already quite a lot of in-kind support. You're providing lab staff, usually as they did in Akureyri for us. You're providing the lab itself. I mean, even solvent sometimes, which of course is maybe the peanuts, but it's not so easy to get. Because Akureyri is not the top destination of shippings or from Sigma Aldrich, and also clerical stuff for accommodation booking and things like that. So they're putting in quite a lot of things already. So I think it would be unlikely that then people would put in extra money, but you can actually negotiate probably some in-kind support, which is very valuable for the visitors and which has a certain value and which you can actually then pin down. And especially, of course, it is important to know the red tape in a small country, especially like on the Azores or in Iceland, because on Vatnajökull, for example, when you work there, they have separated the glacier into four different parts, and for every different part, you have to contact a different body for a permit. It's not so difficult because people are friendly towards science at the administration there, but it's something you have to know and something you cannot do 1 week before the field trip. You have to do that in advance. And there is also the Nagoya Protocol, which adds some difficulties.
The concept of actual cash or in kind, I think this is something that will evolve, because I'm optimistic. I think the EU is going to have to back down on that, because there's no way the university is going to come up in cash. So I'm naively thinking, if we're making some of these things in kind, it becomes for a lab or a field site to contribute something and say, yeah, well, the person's in the lab for 3 days a week. We've set something up. The technicians have set it all up and we were paid for that. And then the last couple of days, it's semi-automatic and people know what they're doing. So the actual costs and the time needed are much less. So, you know, I'm learning, I'm actually committing slightly less perhaps at the end of the project. And that's the bit I will give for free. Then maybe that becomes more viable. But if it really is in cash and we have to find several thousand for each actual money, several thousand for the people to come to visit, that becomes totally unsustainable for many of the labs. Nothing, is there anything online yet? No, okay, so I've seen John, but Nigel's got the mic at the front.
Yeah, I mean, I just two things. What can Europlanet do to help ease that situation? I mean, a lot of things about what Europlanet as a structure can help to ease these information and help to the field sites because of the knowledge. But I just take Grazina. There are examples where, believe it or not, actually the facilities don't want to charge lots of money. The optical telescopes is a good example. The money is not the issue. But I'm going to ask Grazina to comment. But if we wanted to keep the optical telescope network going, it's probably one of the major things is actually just maintaining the structure of the telescopes that you can apply, because each of those individual telescopes is never going to invite loads of external visitors. They don't have the management structure for doing that. But to have a structure like you've got now, where you've got those 17 telescopes, it may not, the funding may not be the problem, because most telescope observations are remote, and there isn't, and the telescopes themselves are not charging a lot. But maybe Grazina, you could comment and others.
The lady at the back. Yeah. Could you, I think is the mic on?
Okay, so for my experience with the telescope network is that we don't need so much money because the people from telescope network, they are interested of being in telescope network, and the people from these telescopes are willing to do the observations in framework of the network, even if they are not paid. For them, the most important is to being in the network, to collaborate with people more than getting the money. This is also because of the administrative difficulties with the reimbursement of the payments, but they are really happy to be in the network, even if they are not paid. So it is beneficial for the telescopes and for the people that wants to take the observations on them. So I'm thinking that making this sustainability of this network would be really beneficial.
Yes, I agree that small observatories, small telescopes for them it is very useful to be in the network, and this helps for them to receive local funding from local funding those agencies and the government. However, this is not the case for larger telescopes. So, and of course, scientists also wish to have access for larger telescopes, so this should be solved somehow.
Okay, I think that's excellent news, and but unfortunately, it's not the case for, say, Atomki's lab with the accelerator, where they're charging several thousands per day. And although I'm sure I think they're ripping us off, but I know it's a really expensive facility, and there's no way we can run that on a hundreds per day. That's the electricity they're spending. I dread to think what that costs these days. So John Merrison at the back was next.
Is this working? Yeah, great. So there's been discussion about trying to get co-financing from the facilities or co-financing from ESA. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is actually getting money from the visitors.
Right. Yeah.
So many of the visitors coming to my lab, they are willing to contribute, to pay for access to my facility. They just don't really have a mechanism in order to do it. Most of them are from universities. They're researchers. Their funding comes from national funds. So the problem is that most national funding agencies, they would be a little bit skeptical for giving money to a group to go abroad to get access to a facility. The only success stories I have about that are from Switzerland. So I've had 3 different groups from Switzerland that have had success with that. It's because probably Switzerland has a slightly different attitude in that. So these are groups that have been to my lab before, funded under TA, and then they apply for some essentially access fees to my lab in their national funding.
Okay.
So, I mean, my suggestion is that one option is that Europlanet could maybe facilitate that they could mediate the process of groups applying for national funding in order to get access to the whole range of facilities that Europlanet governs over.
I see that as an and.
Yeah,
this is a benefit that if we keep the profile of the Europlanet labs and facilities high, this is a natural spin-off. And I slightly disagree with you about, I think probably half the European countries have special grants that you can apply to go and do work elsewhere. There's small grants in certain places that you can do that. And it's something that we should encourage. And it's also, as you start to work more and more internationally with groups, you find out that there are these other funding streams, which, okay, it's only a few thousand, but that's actually all they need to come. And that's something that we should certainly make. But I don't think we can use that model for the sort of the sustainability. This is a benefit, and it will help all the labs that are involved in Europlanet and all the field sites. It encourages people from Korea or whoever to come and do exchange visits and collaborate, and that leads to publications, which leads to higher profile, which hopefully you're then on the wheel of getting things more sustainable. Jonas?
Sorry, I don't have a lot of answers. I just have more questions for you. It's just one question is so the telescopes see value in the network in itself and the having a central review process. Would the laboratories and the field site also see some value out of it? And would they be like also maybe the expenses are a bit higher, but there may be some value.
The expenses are high, but this is the point I was trying to stress, is that what's in it for the labs and the field sites, in addition to basically infrastructure support is important. to do the peer reviewing, to make sure good proposals come to your facility or want to come to your facility, and that they're then peer reviewed at relatively low cost. Well, ESF is doing this, so it's all, we use the term relative. He says sticking the knife into the costs of ESF. But that's the benefit I see, is that people contact me and come into my labs all the time with one or two like, can I come and do this? Can I come and do that? And then you put lots of time and effort into trying to work out exactly what they want to do, and then trying to get them to write something down. If there's a standards application process through the TA system, they are committed to write 2 pages of science, and then it's independently reviewed. So for example, sometimes cultural heritage people come to my labs and I have no idea what they're talking about, and I'm not really capable. I think, oh, that's interesting, that's fun, so we sometimes do it, but scientifically wise, I don't know if this is cutting edge. Whereas with the peer review, if somebody wants to come and analyze something on a meteorite that I know nothing about, but the committee tells me that that's really good, that is the stamp of approval, and that is the system, the way we set it up, that is so valuable for everybody. We don't get rubbish proposals coming to do projects in our labs, because that's we go through we check if it's technically possible ourselves, and the peer review looks at it, and then if it gets through, we're fairly sure that the science behind it is reasonably good. And that, I think, is a big benefit. Well, but that's why we have the extra costs. I mean, we don't just have the lab costs, there's also the administrative and admin on top of that, and doing the peer review. Right, we're going to let
on the TAs, the early careers people, they put these down as part of their CV when they're applying for other things, because there is a kite mark of applying and getting something in peer review, which is really important when you're writing fellowships and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing you probably aren't all aware, but one of the nightmares for me and the secretary, Fanny Boss, who works with me, probably at least once a month, we are having to go and find somebody's proposal, see which lab they went to, how much that lab costs, and then we write a letter for their CV or their application for a promotion. I got funded equivalent of 10,000 euros to go and do an analysis in Amsterdam or wherever it was. And this is something that we're doing all the time in the background. Susmita and then Fulvio.
Hi.
Yeah.
I think what's going to ultimately happen is we'll have to run several things in tandem and offer commercial access, as Fulvio offered us at Europlanet. We could facilitate by providing different rates for academic and different rates for industry users, for example. It could, and then you've got the Space IRI running alongside that, hopefully. And then the crowdfunding platform. It sounds really exciting if we can bring this all together.
Yeah. One thing that is, I don't know if it's not clear, but is not coming out from this discussion, is that the field sites, they're not owned by institutions.
Yeah.
So a lab is clearly owned by the institution. I need to get to your university and get a badge to come to your lab and meet people and stuff like that. But if you come to Botswana, I can come and meet you at the airport and you won't even see my university.
Yeah.
Because this is a facility that was built by Europlanet. And well, I'm working at that university. My salary is paid by that university, of course. But for the field site, we can bypass entirely the institutions. Clearly, we need local people that facilitate the permits and the access to the area and stuff like that. But, you know, I think for the field site, we need to invent something completely new. Because the Makadi Kadi Pan in Botswana is not owned by my university, actually. You know, so, and same for Ethiopia or for Iceland and Argentina. It's just.
I'm going to say something before Barbara has a last word. We're going to stop now because it's coffee time. We're going to continue in here at 11. We're supposed to go out into breakout groups. I'm not sure if we need to do that or whether we just continue discussing, because we've raised lots of observations and comments, and there's lots of things we need to follow up. And I think, Fulvio's made lots of points about the field site, some of which I hadn't really thought through as the last thing he said. So we'll come back and we'll continue this sort of discussion. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong day. That's why. Okay. Yes. I'm sorry. Raising space research policy is next. Okay. So we're back here at 2, and that's when we were supposed to be doing the breakouts. Yeah. I mean, Barbara, do you want to add? Or
I wanted to add that what Fulvio just said is correct, but in the spirit of Europlanet, the teams arriving to the field facility should be in some way involved at the university level, give seminars, be in touch with people, discuss a little bit the project. I know that this will not happen always, but the spirit of the declaration was that.
Yeah, well, that's something we should.
That is important because this is the feedback with the university or the institution hosting.
Yeah.
If not, it's just a service. So there is a subtle lines in between the geotourism or service in the lab and what is Europlanet have to do.
Yeah, I think these are things we must come back to this afternoon. Okay, so I'd like to thank you all. And please think about this, and we'll meet back here at is it 2 o'clock this afternoon? 2 o'clock this afternoon in here, and we'll continue this thought. So think about. We've thrown lots of different ideas at you, and particularly remember that there's 2 aspects of this. There's one, if the Space RI is funded and that model continues and becomes co-funded in 5 years' time or whatever. And there's the Europlanet Society and Europlanet, the heritage from the Europlanet RIs to what do we want to keep going and how can we do that? Okay, so see you back here for a different session at 11 and see you after lunch here at 2. Still nothing from people online? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. See you afterwards.